Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming together to once again immerse ourselves in the wisdom of Torah. I'm so appreciative that during the busyness of our lives that we're able to find time not just to open a book and to read words out of a book and share Torah that way, but also perhaps even more importantly to share one another amongst ourselves, because within each one of us there is divrei Torah, words, matters, and deeds of Torah. And when we do that, we enrich the world and we enrich one another. So once again, I'm so grateful. I feel so blessed to be able to study with each one of you and to bring more Torah out into the world. We're going to be reading our Parshat this week, which is Chayei. If you'd like to turn to Genesis chapter 23, verse 1, that's where we're going to begin. Once again, we're going to begin Genesis chapter 23, verse 1. At this point, I'd like to invite everyone, if you'd like to unmute, and then together we can resonate with the blessing collectively of what we like to say before immersing ourselves in words and deeds and matters of Torah, thanking God for this opportunity. Together we recite our blessing. Baruch atah
Eloheinu melech haolam asher
nanu
mitzvotav
la'asot
la'asot b'divrei Torah.
Thank you, God, for this opportunity of coming together, immersing ourselves in the written word and in the spoken word and in the relationships of Torah that we all bring to this moment. So once again, we are in Genesis chapter 23 of verse 1. I'll share with you a few verses, and then I'll invite individuals among you to unmute and read some verses as well. Sarah's lifetime, the span of Sarah's life, came to 127 years. Sarah died in Kiryat Arba, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan, and Abraham proceeded to mourn for Sarah and to bewail her. Then Abraham rose from beside his dead and spoke to the Hittites, saying, I am a resident alien among you. Sell me a burial site among you, that I may remove my dead for burial. And the Hittites replied to Abraham, saying to him, Hear us, my lord, you are the elect of God among us. Bury your dead in the choicest of our burial places. None of us will withhold his burial place from you for burying your dead. Thereupon Abraham bowed low to the people of the land, the Hittites, and he said to them, If it is your wish that I remove my dead for burial, you must agree to intercede for me with Ephron, son of Zohar. Let him sell me the cave of Machpelah that he owns, which is at the edge of his land. Let him sell it to me at full price for a burial site in your midst. We're now on verse 10. And once again, I encourage everyone else to mute so that we can minimize our background noise. And so now we're in verse 10. And Steve, Brenton, would you like to begin reading there?
Ephron himself was sitting among the Hittites, and in the hearing of all the Hittites and all the town leaders, Ephron the Hittite answered Abraham, saying, No, my lord, listen to me. I am giving you the field and the cave that is in it. I give it to you in the sight of my people. I give it to you. Go ahead, bury your dead. But Abraham bowed low before the landowning citizens, and in their hearing he addressed Ephron the Hittite. Oh, if only you would listen to me. I will pay the field's price. Take it from me, and let me bury my dead there. Ephron then made this reply to Abraham, My lord, hear me. Land worth 400 shekels of silver. What is that between you and me? Go bury your dead. Abraham listened. Go ahead.
Go ahead, please finish.
Okay. Abraham listened to Ephron, and Abraham weighed out for Ephron the amount of silver he had named in the hearing of the Hittites, 400 shekels of silver, using weights.
Thank you. Thank you. Let me go on. Thank you so much, Steve. And Richard, would you like to begin reading at verse 17?
Yes, thank you. So Ephron's land in Machpelah near Mamre, the field was with its cave and all the trees anywhere within the confines of that field passed to Abraham as his possession in the presence of the Hittites, of all who entered the gate of his town. And when Abraham buried his wife Sarah in the cave of the field of Machpelah, facing Mamre, now Hebron, in the land of Canaan. Thus the field with its cave passed from Hittites to Abraham as a burial site.
Rabbi, may I interject just a moment? The JPS translation, starting with verse 10, is so different from the one that was read. Could someone read the JPS translation? It just seems like a whole different dialogue. Can we handle that later?
Thank you, Jay. Thank you so much for it's, as we say, every translation is an interpretation, and we welcome them all to the table. Thank you so much. And now, Mark Thompson, would you like to unmute and begin reading at the start of chapter 24?
Yes. Abraham was now old, advanced in years, and the Lord had blessed Abraham in all things. And Abraham said to the senior servant of his household, who had charge of all that he owned, "Put your hand under my thigh, and I will make you swear by the Lord, the God of heaven and the God of the earth, that you will not take a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, among whom I dwell, but will go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac." And the servant said to him, "What if the woman does not consent to follow me to this land? Shall I then take your son back to the land from which you came?" Abraham answered him, "On no account must you take my son back there. The Lord, the God of heaven, who took me from my father's house and from my native land, who promised me on oath, saying, 'I will assign this land to your offspring,' he will send his angel before you, and you will get a wife for my son from there. And if the woman does not consent to follow you, you shall then be clear of this oath to me, but do not take my son back there." So the servant put his hand under the thigh of his master, Abraham, and swore to him as bidden.
Thank you so much, Mark. And let me ask, Justin, would you like to begin reading at verse 10 of chapter 24?
And the servant took 10 camels of his master's camels, and he went, and all the best of his master was in his hand. And he arose, and he went to Aram Naharaim, the city of Nahor. And he made the camels kneel outside the city beside the well of water at eventide, at the time the maidens go out to draw water. And he said, "O Lord, the God of my master Abraham, please cause to happen to me today and perform loving kindness with my master Abraham. Behold, I am standing by the water fountain, and the daughters of the people of the city are coming out to draw water. And it will be that the maiden whom I will say, 'Lower your pitcher, and I will drink,' and she will say, 'Drink, and I will also water your camels,' her have you designated for your servant, for Isaac, and through her may I know that you have performed loving kindness with my master."
Thank you, Justin. Martine, would you like to read a little bit, beginning at verse 15?
Before he was done praying, Rebekah, who had been born to Bethuel, son of Milcah, wife of Abraham's brother Nahor, was going forth with her pitcher on her shoulder. She was an exceedingly beautiful girl of marriageable age, whom no man had yet known. She went down to the spring, filled her pitcher, and went up. The slave ran toward her and said, "Let me sip a little water from your pitcher." And she replied, "Drink, sir." Quickly, she lowered her pitcher on her hand and let him drink. The drinking done, she said, "I will draw some for your camels too, till they are done drinking." Quickly, she emptied her pitcher in the trough, and she again ran to the well to draw water, drawing water for all his camels. The man stood staring at her, silent, in order to learn whether or not Adonai had cleared the way for him. When the camels were done drinking, the man took a gold nose ring, a half shekel in weight, and 2 bracelets for her wrists, 10 gold shekels in weight, and said, "Please tell me, whose daughter are you? Is there a place in your father's house for us to lodge?" She said to him, "I am Bethuel's daughter. He is the son of Milcah, who she bore to Nahor." And she added, "We have straw and fodder in abundance, as well as room for lodging." The man kneeled and bowed down to Adonai, saying, "Blessed is Adonai, God of my master Abraham, whose faithful kindness has not deserted my master. As for me, Adonai led me straight away to my master's brother's house." The girl then ran and related these things to her mother's household. Now Rebekah had a brother named Laban, and Laban ran outside to the man at the spring. When Laban saw the nose ring and the bracelets on his sister's wrists and heard his sister Rebekah say, "This is what the man told me," he went to the man who was still standing by his camels at the spring. "Come in, O blessed of Adonai," said he. "Why stand outside when I have cleared the house and also made space for the camels?" So he ushered the man into the house, unsaddled the camels, and gave them straw and fodder, and brought water in to wash his feet and those of the men with him. But when food was put in front of him, the man said, "I will not eat until I have had my say." He, Laban, said, "Speak.
Thank you. Thank you,
I am the
Martine.
slave of Abraham."
Thank you, Martine. Let me invite someone else to speak. That's very beautiful. And let me ask Barbara, would you like to read beginning at verse 34?
"I am Abraham's servant," he began. "The Lord has greatly blessed my master, and he has become rich. He has given him sheep and cattle, silver and gold, male and female slaves, camels and asses. And Sarah, my master's wife, bore my master a son in her old age, and he has assigned to me everything he owns. Now my master made me swear, saying, 'You shall not get a wife for my son from the daughters of the Canaanites, in whose land I dwell, but you shall go to my father's house, to my kindred, and get a wife for my son.' And I said to my master, 'What if the woman does not follow me?' He replied to me, 'Adonai, whose ways I have followed, will send his angel with you and make your errand successful, and you will get a wife for my son from my kindred, from my father's house. Thus only shall you be free from my adjuration, if when you come to my kindred they refuse if when you come to my kindred they refuse you, only then shall you be freed from my adjuration.'"
Thank you so much, Barbara. David and Susan, would you like to unmute and read a few verses starting at 42?
When I came to the well today,
You'll have to unmute.
Cat, I'm sorry. Okay, here we go. When I came to the well today, I prayed, "Adonai, God of my master Abraham, if you truly intend to clear the way on which I am going, here I am at the water fount. When a young woman comes out to get water, I will say to her, 'Please give me a drink of water from your pitcher.' If she answers, 'Go ahead and drink, and I will draw water for your camels too,' let her be the one you have designated as the wife for my master's son." Before I had finished rehearsing my thought, Rebekah came with a water pitcher on her shoulder and went down to the well to get water. I said to her, "Please give me a drink." She quickly lowered her pitcher and said, "Drink, and I will water your camels too." So I drank, and she gave water to the camels too.
I asked her, "Whose daughter are you?" And she answered, I am the daughter of Bethuel, son of Nahor, and Milcah. Then I put the ring on her nose and the bracelets on her wrist. I knelt down in worship of Hashem, and I praised Hashem, the God of my master Abraham, who had led me on the right path to get the daughter of my master's brother for his son. And now, if you mean to treat my master with faithful kindness, tell me. If not, tell me, and I will turn in another direction. Keep going or not?
I'm going to invite someone else to read. Thank you both so much. Let me invite Dave. Would you like to read beginning at verse 50?
Then Laban and Bethuel answered, the matter was decreed by the Lord. We cannot speak to you, bad or good. Here is Rebekah before you. Take her and go, and let her be a wife to your master's son, as the Lord has spoken. When Abraham's servant heard the words, he bowed low to the ground before the Lord. The servant brought out objects of silver and gold and garments and gave them to Rebekah, and he gave presents to her brother and her mother. Then he and the men with him drank, and they spent the night. When they arose the next morning, he said, give me leave to go to my master. But her brother and her mother said, let the maiden remain with us some 10 days, then you may go. He said to them, do not delay me now that the Lord has made my errand successful. Give me leave that I may go to my master. And they said, let us call the girl and ask for her reply. They called Rebekah and said to her, will you go with this man? And she said, I will. So they set off, their sister Rebekah and her nurse, along with Abraham's servant and his men. And they blessed Rebekah and said to her, O sister, may you grow into thousands of myriads. May your offspring seize the gates of their foes. Then Rebekah and her maids rose, mounted the camels, and followed the man. So the servant took Rebekah and went on his way.
Thank you, Dave. Margot, would you like to begin reading at verse 62?
62, yeah. Isaac had just come back from the vicinity of Beer Valdroy, for he was settled in the region of the Negev. And Isaac went out walking in a field toward evening, and looking up, he saw camels approaching. Raising her eyes, Rebekah saw Isaac. She alighted from the camel and said to the servant, who is that man walking in the field toward us? And the servant said, that is my master. So she took her veil and covered herself. The servant told Isaac all the things that he had done. Isaac then brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Let me ask Wayne, would you like to begin reading at the start of chapter 25?
Sure. Thank you, Rabbi. Then again, Abraham took a wife, and her name was Keturah, and she bare him Zimron and Jokshan and Medan and Median and Ishbak and Shua. And Jokshan begat Sheba and Dedan. And the sons of Dedan were Asherim and Letushim and Leumim. And the sons of Median, Ephah and Epher and Hanach and Abidah and Eldaah. All these were the children of Keturah. And Abraham gave all that he had unto Isaac, and unto the sons of the concubines whom Abraham had. And Abraham gave gifts and sent them away from Isaac his son, while he yet lived eastward unto the east country. And these are the days of the years of Abraham's life which he lived, and 100 years and 65 years. And Abraham expired and died in a good old age, old and full of years, and was gathered to his peoples.
Go ahead, keep reading, please.
And his sons Isaac and Ishmael buried him in the cave of Machpelah, in the field of Ephron, the son of Zohar the Hittite, which is before Mamre. The field which Abraham purchased of the sons of Heth. There were Abraham buried, and Sarah his wife. And it came to pass after the death of Abraham that God blessed his son Isaac, and Isaac abode by the well Lahai Roi.
Thank you, Wayne. Thank you so much. Let me ask,
Thank you.
Richard, would you like to conclude, beginning with verse 12? And you'll need to unmute, Richard. Thank you.
This is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son of Hagar the Egyptian, Sarah's slave, bore to Abraham. These are the names of the sons of Ishmael, by their names in the order of their birth. Nebaioth, the firstborn of Ishmael, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tima, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedma. These are the sons of Ishmael, and these are their names by their villages and by their encampments, 12 chieftains of as many tribes. These were the years of the life of Ishmael, 137 years. Then he breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his kin. They dwelt from Havilah by Shur, which is close to Egypt, all the way to Ashur. They camped alongside all their kinsmen.
Thank you so much, everyone. That's our entire Torah portion of this week, Chayei Sarah, which is translated as the life of Sarah. I'd like to share with you just a little bit of focused study, and then I'll invite everyone to share what has provoked you, what has fascinated you, your insights, and your thought about this week's Torah portion. And I'd like to begin actually by looking at the graphic that I've included on this week's study sheet, which is a painting by an artist who was born in Iran, Kihila Rokhsari, and it is an image of a Sufi who is dancing in the way of what's known as the whirling dervishes. So I'd like to start off first by reading a statement of Rahili Rokhsari's art that he wrote. He says, "The whole painting process for me represents a full life cycle. It is born with the first brushstroke and dies with the last. At the end, after I put on my signature, I whisper to myself that in the next painting, I will start in a different way." I was struck by this, both the painting and the artist's words, for a number of reasons. Because this Torah portion in particular, and indeed the entirety of the Jewish Bible, is in a sense a project seeking to confound our notion about what's an end, what's a beginning, what is life, what is death, what is winning, what is losing. All of that is compacted into this week's Torah portion. Because on one level, we start off with the name of the Torah portion, Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, which leads us to have an expectation that now we're going to read about all a chronicle of all the things that Sarah had done. And yet within the very opening of this week's Torah portion, it tells us that she died. Why is there this promotion that teaches us that we're going to learn something about the life of Sarah only to encounter her death. There's also a lesson that's compacted in here about the nature of winning and the nature of losing. I don't know if you remember from a previous Torah portion where God promises to Abraham early on that he will be the progenitor of a great and mighty nation. And Abraham's response is great skepticism. How could that be? I don't even have any children. Everything that I have is going to pass on to this man, my manservant in my home. That same manservant is the character that we read about in this week's Torah portion. And his expression of gratitude, of the servant's expression of gratitude when he finds someone who's going to marry Abraham's son Isaac and will thereby provide a great number of descendants and start a whole line. This man who we later come to know as Eliezer is so grateful. He feels such an outpouring of love that he's found someone to be a bride for Abraham's son Isaac. This is the person who could have inherited everything, all the wealth, if Abraham had never had a son and never had any more descendants. How is it that someone like Eliezer can take joy in the fact that he will no longer be inheriting all this wealth, but someone else will? So let me go back to our painting that's on the cover here, because it's going to, I think, embedded in the painting itself and in our artist's words are lessons about beginnings and endings, life and death, holding on to something, letting everything go, and finding that you're wealthier than you had ever imagined you could be once you let everything go. Because in the painting, we have this figure who is a Sufi, who's engaged in this dance, this meditative dance. And we know that Sufism we associate with the great Persian poet Rumi, who lived in the 13th century. And Rumi said, "There are many roads which lead to God. I have chosen the one of dance and music." And here is this figure who's spinning and spinning and spinning. And the spinning dance of the whirling dervish is meant to create this mystical entrancement where one becomes unaware of the normal rules about gravity and about the normal rules of physics, and one becomes so entranced that one loses oneself in the moment, so to speak. And the tall hat that is worn as part of this ritual, that's considered to be the tombstone of the ego. And the white robe that goes spinning, spinning, spinning around, that is described as the shroud of the ego. And all that gets torn asunder, if you will. It gets lifted up as if by magic, as if defying gravity itself, and gets exposed and left behind. There's actually a moment in the dance where they take off their jackets as if they are in fact disrobing part of their materiality. So this is what's happening in the dance of the dervish as part of the Sufi ritual. And you'll notice that the name of the painting is Twilight. Twilight is an interesting time. Twilight is this transition point. It's this transition point between, say, day and night. It's the transition point perhaps between the clarity of reason and the mystery of non-reason. Perhaps it's the transition point between life and death. And this notion about letting go and entering into the mystery I think has something to do with the capacity to make what seems like the end of something that we've relied upon for clarity, that we have this capacity to make that end a transcendent experience, to take us to an even richer, more expansive notion of life than we had understood with our cognitive rational abilities. So I think that's what's happening here in the painting. I think that's what is being described here by the artist itself, who says the painting itself is a full life cycle. It's born with the first brush and dies with the last. But what does he say? With the last brush, it's not over, because he says, next time, I'm going to make it even more different. He has a sense that the end of this painting is not the end of his creativity. There's yet more innovation within him to give free expression to. I think it's quite beautiful. So here we are ourselves. Let's locate ourselves. We're in this ongoing conclusion, if you will, to an election season in the United States. And we're wondering, well, when did it start? Has it ended? Is it ongoing? When will it end? And the election season itself so easily allows us to think in terms of winners and losers, the end of something, the beginning of something. And what Torah teaches us is it seeks to confound our notion about what really is the nature of a beginning and what really is the nature of an ending. Because we think we know, and Torah says it's far more complex than you imagine. Torah teaches us that the start of something new, which is represented in our narrative by the opening of Genesis, Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim et ha'aretz. As we discussed when we looked at that Torah portion, the very opening word, Bereshit, defies our notion of what a beginning is all about, because it doesn't clarify anything. It doesn't locate us anywhere. It confuses and confounds and provokes. And as our Kabbalists teach us, what God is doing in this very moment of beginning is actually a contraction of God's self. It is a withdrawal of God's self so that other things can come into existence. And that Torah is telling us is the very heart of what it means to begin something. It doesn't mean to impose dominance over anything, quite the opposite. It means to withdraw oneself to allow other life to come into existence. There's a love and a generosity that is bound up with the notion of what we would call a beginning. And what is an end? What is an end? The Bible teaches us with the ending of this book, this whole book called the Jewish Bible, the second book of Chronicles, which is the concluding book. It ends in this provocative note. It ends with King Cyrus of Persia saying to the Jewish people then living in exile in Persia, he says to them, "You're living here in exile. Well, you can stay if you want, but I give you permission to now return to the land of Israel and rebuild your temple if that's what you'd like to do." And it's left hanging. The story is left hanging. We don't know. There's no vote taken by the people living in exile. There's no asking of people, raise your hands if you want to go back to Israel. We don't know who's staying and who's going, because the question is not being asked of people in a story that's from thousands of years ago. It's a question that's asked of us. The question is asked of us of, do you want to continue this journey? Do you want to write the next chapter in this ongoing story? We're the only ones that can answer that. But in any case, it's not an ending. It's merely the beginning of the next chapter, which it's up to us to write. So that's the way in which Torah begins to play with us to teach us, to tease us, as if we think we know what a beginning is, we know what an end is, we know when something starts and when something stops. And Torah says, oh no, it's much more complex than that. So here is this week's Torah portion, which is an example of that, because it begins with Chayei Sarah, the life of Sarah, and she died. Once again, it's teasing us to say, you think you're going to open this up, Chayei Sarah? You think you're going to start reading about all the wonderful things that she's done and the wonderful food that she cooks and where she goes to play mahjong and everything like that? No. Die. So we're now confused. Why would it be saying the life of Sarah and deal with her death? So I want to take us through several verses taken straight out of our story here, to look at the nature of life, death, beginning, endings, winnings, losing, things like that, okay? And we're going to be looking at some of these characters that are in our story, like Abraham and Sarah and Hagar and Eliezer. And one can look at them in terms of, yes, the storyline in which they have a role, but I also would want to encourage us to think about them as archetypes of different types of people, archetypes, all of whom dwell within each one of us, and we get to a certain extent, choose which one we're going to manifest, but they all dwell within us, because they all represent basic human tendencies and qualities that occupy each one of us and that we have to deal with. So if you have the study sheet, you'll see here, number 1 is Milcah too has borne children. Bethuel begot Rebekah, and so forth and so on. That is how our previous Torah portion ended. And if you remember, the main narrative arc of last week's Torah portion towards the end was the Akedah Yitzhak, the binding of Isaac, where Abraham and Isaac go up to Mount Moriah, and it seems as if there's about to be some kind of killing, some kind of human sacrifice, some kind of offering. And we discussed last week what happened there. We're not sure what happened up there, but perhaps it defied our expectations about, if we hadn't already read the story, when we might be anticipating, oh my goodness, Isaac is being taken up as a sacrifice. Abraham is going to be killing Isaac. This is going to be terrible. And yet, that story about death, possible death and sacrifice, as soon as that bit of the narrative is concluded, the Torah portion truly ends with this description about all this other life, and in particular, all these other human beings that were being brought into the world. So our notion about what to have expected in terms of the Akedah Yitzhak, then it turns around the Torah and says, and look at all this life that's coming into this world. The next verse I share with you is, this is the line of Ishmael, Abraham's son. That's how this week's Torah portion ends. It ends towards the right, at the kind of the penultimate ending of this week's Torah portion is about the death of Abraham. We began with the death of Sarah, and we're concluding this week's Torah portion with the death of Abraham. And immediately after the death of Abraham, we have new life. And whose new life is it in this case? It's all about Ishmael. Ishmael, in a sense, has now been revived in the narrative itself, been brought back into the story. And we are presented with all of these descendants. And we honor all these descendants of the line of Ishmael. 2 weeks Torah portions in which there's either the expectation of death or actual death, and each one ending with new life. And this is the next verse I share with you is, this is the line of Isaac. That's how our next week's Torah portion is going to begin. Toldot Yitzhak. This is about, once again, new shifting now from Ishmael and the life that he's bringing into this world. And now we're shifting into the life that Isaac will be bringing into this world. So now I want to shift to a different theme, not so much about life, but now some contrasting dynamic, some contrasting archetypes, having to do with Abraham and Sarah and Hagar. So under number 2, I have this verse. Sarai treated her harshly. If you remember, the context of that verse is the episode where Hagar has now born a child to Abraham. Sarah has not at this point. And Sarah now treats Hagar harshly. And so if you can think about this, not just as the characters in the story, but these archetypes. In this sense, Sarah is now the archetype, that tendency within all of us to see life as a zero-sum game. Hagar is bringing something of value to my husband Abraham, and that must mean that I now have been diminished in the eyes of my husband Abraham, and it's all her fault. And now, therefore, she has become my enemy, my competitor for my husband's affections and perhaps even for his wealth. So she sees this threat that if someone has more, then I will have less. Sarah is this character at this moment who's viewing not just as this zero-sum game, but who's viewing just life in general as so subject to limitations. So if you go next, we see this verse from the same chapter, chapter 16. And this is the voice of Hagar. You are El Roi, for I have seen after having been seen. Hagar is a voice here of someone who thought the end might be near, and yet she can see new life. She has seen God, even though she herself has seen God, it has not brought about the end of anything for her. She has seen the capacity for new life. And then we're going to contrast that with the next verse, once again returning to the character called Sarah. Sarah laughed to herself, saying, now that I am withered. And so this is the scene where she's been promised that she's going to bear a child. A divine voice that said, you're going to bear a child. And Sarah instead of saying, amazing, that's so wonderful, what a great gift, I've been blessed, she is skeptical because she's focused on the impossibility of that gift. She's focused on her own incapacity and limitations. For her, this is talking about a future that's out of reach. That's not a possibility. So we're playing with these tensions between seeing things, a life only as full of limitations and impossibilities, a zero sum, and then other characters who are seeing new possibilities, new life. And then we'll turn over. And again, you'll see the voice of Sarah, who says, cast that out, that slave woman and her son. Again, expressing this notion about the world isn't big enough for the two of us. In a sense, echoing the voice that we heard from Cain in his encounter with his brother Abel. If you're here, if I'm here, you can't be here. We both can't occupy this space. Okay. So again, taking it outside just the strict narrative of what Torah is telling us, these are voices that are inside each one of us. Let's tell the truth. Sometimes we get worried about our own position in the world, our own position within a family, our own position within a place of work, seeing all those around us as threats to our own position. So let's look at Abraham. We have number in number 3 have verses related to Abraham. And of course, the first introduction to Abraham is this notion of Lech Lecha. Lech Lecha, which is there is another possibility other than the one that you've been dwelling in and have been attached to. And if you just leave all of that behind, if you just let go of all of that, there's a great possibility that lies ahead. Just let go of it. Lech Lecha. And then immediately after that, we're introduced to this verse that says, Avram passed through as he's letting go, as he's leaving. And the word for passing through in the Hebrew there is avar, which means to cross over a boundary. And avar becomes the basis for the word ivrit, which means Hebrew. So to be an ivrit is to follow in the footsteps, literally, of Avram, to be a boundary crosser, to be able to have this capacity to leave old things behind that have been holding us back. Okay. And then we'd start to become introduced into the nature, the character of Avram, where God tells Avram that things have really gotten bad, and I'm just going to destroy everyone in Sodom and Gomorrah. And this should begin to evoke for us the story about Noah, where God said something similar to Noah. Things have devolved into violence. I'm going to destroy everything. And I have the picture of God saying that and then pausing, waiting to hear if Noah would say something like, everyone's bad? No, my neighbor, Charlie is not bad. In fact, he looked after our cats when we went on vacation. He's a good guy. You really are going to destroy everyone? I bet there's some other Charlies out there in the world too. But Noah didn't say anything. But in this case, Abraham says, really? You're going to destroy everyone? Even the innocent along with the guilty? Well, hey, wait a minute. What if I found 40 people? What if I found 30 people? What if I found 10 people? So this is the voice of someone who refuses to accept even what God's judgment is, who is someone who's expressing, if you will, a challenge to what is being presented, who refuses to accept something that doesn't seem right to him, won't remain silent. And we see that being expressed in his own personal life as well. The next verse, the matter distressed Abraham greatly, for it concerned a son of his. This is the moment when Sarah says, you've got to get rid of Hagar and Ishmael. And this is the verse that we see there. Oh, this really upset Abraham. And it takes God intervening to say, I understand that you love Ishmael. And don't worry, Ishmael is going to be okay. I'm going to make a great nation of him as well. The particular covenant that I've entered into with you is going to be passed on to Isaac. But other greatness awaits your other son Ishmael as well. But here is, in a very deeply personal way, Abraham is that voice within us who can't accept the fact that the world can't be shared. We feel it can be shared. Everyone can be loved. Everyone's deserving of a place. And here is, as toward the end of our Torah portion, the next one, go to the land of my birth and get a wife for my son Isaac. If you remember, that occurs immediately after the death of Sarah. And what is Abraham's response immediately after the death of Sarah, arranging for her burial and everything? Immediately, Abraham does not begin to recoil, does not begin to kind of and cloister himself. He doesn't hide in a cave. He doesn't withdraw. That's the word I was looking for. He doesn't withdraw from life. Instead, what he does is he takes on the greatest responsibility that he can imagine at this time, which is to ensure that life goes forward. Even in the face of this immediate death, life must go forward. And even more profound, towards the end of our Torah portion, Abraham took another wife. Very old age. He's done so much already. So, his wife Sarah has now died. And yet Abraham, he takes another wife and has all these other children. Abraham is this voice within us who basically says, never give up, never give up. There's more life yet ahead. There's more that you can do. There's more for you to engage in. There's more that you have to contribute. Don't withdraw, don't give up, don't surrender. But I want to conclude what I'd like to share with you, and then I'll invite everyone to share your thoughts as well, with some thoughts by French philosopher Paul Ricoeur, who wrote a great book called History and Truth. And he wrote about what he called about the negation as transcendence versus negation as finitude. And the quote from his book is, I think, I want, in spite of my finitude, in spite of my limitations. So here's what Paul Ricoeur basically is saying in this part of his book. We all experience life as finitude, that life has some end to it, that there are limitations in our lives. And we can react in a couple of different ways, Paul Ricoeur says. One is through what he calls primal negation, which is what we are seeing as the archetype of Sarah representing, which is, I don't have. The past is no longer, the future is not yet, and it is a life filled with want and absence and lack. It is a life full of grievance rather than gratitude. And it leads to sadness and depression and decline and withdrawal. And politically, it leads to a form of nihilism, where I'm being destroyed and therefore so must everything else be destroyed. Paul Ricoeur says that's one way to approach our awareness of the finitude of our lives. The other way, he says, is what he characterizes as the negation of negation, which is what, in a sense, Abraham represents as an archetype. It is a refusal to accept these limitations. It is a contestation with what are the apparent limitations of our lives. It is an interrogation of what is in front of us, which is exactly what Abraham does here. And that leads to life as affirmation, liberation, construction of a better self, a better continuation of ourself. And that's what Abraham's primary mission is here, even towards the end of his life. He seeks to make sure there's a continuation of life. He doesn't say, Sarah's dead, I'm about to die, what's the point? Everything else might as well die. He ensures that there's a continuation of this mission and of life itself. So here's what Torah is presenting to us, is that beginnings are present within every closing, but they require a willfulness on our part in order for them to be birthed and actualized. And the nature of sacred beginnings, as we see it being modeled by God's self in Bereshit, the nature of sacred beginnings is not about dominance and victory and conquest over others. Quite the opposite. Sacred beginnings are imbued with a sense of humility, an overcoming of ego's rapacious appetites, generosity, and a desire to create an expanding universe of relationships. And that, my friends, I believe, is what is happening with the Sufis when they are dancing, seeking to create an ever-expanding universe of relationships. And that's something that each one of us has the capacity within as well, to share, to create new beginnings through humility, generosity, and overcoming of our ego's most rapacious appetites and a desire to create a rich fabric of relationships. So with that, I'd like to invite others. What jumped out at you in this week's Torah portion? What are your thoughts about it, your reflections, your observations? So if you'd like to raise your hand, I'll call on you and you can share some thoughts with me as well. Wayne, yes, please.
So Rabbi, I'm wondering if you've heard of this interpretation of what we've read so far since the beginning, and that is the binding of Isaac, that Abraham brought Isaac up on God's instruction to slay him. And last week I had mentioned that I've always been troubled by that portion because I was wondering always what the conversation was going down the hill. The interpretation I read earlier today was that Abraham was so emotionally distraught from what Hagar had done to Ishmael and how he had been separated from her because of Sarah's instruction for Hagar to leave. And he felt he lost one of his offspring, that in a way he was okay with having to then get rid of Isaac.
Wow.
Which I think is, I never heard that before. It's apparently from the Midrash, and I'd never heard that before. And I was wondering if you have ever heard that either.
No, I never heard it put that way before. And there's so many midrashim about this, and we talked about some of them last time. That saddens me to hear that kind of an approach, because that is more the nihilistic approach that we were talking about, and that's not what I associate with Abraham. So no, that's a new one for me. But thank you. Yes, Susan. And you'll need to unmute. Yeah, there you go.
So I love the fact that Sarah's act of mistreating Hagar and then of casting Hagar and Ishmael out is included in our story. And that Ishmael and his descendants, that there's a place for everybody in our sacred text. That it's really important to acknowledge all of our behaviors, all of who we are inside, and all the things that we've done, and that everybody has a place in the story.
Everyone has a place in the story, and everyone has a place around our table. And it's hard this year in particular that we won't be able to physically have present around all of our tables of Thanksgiving all that we would like to invite. So I hope that we all take an opportunity to extend ourselves some way to say, I really wanted to have you at my table this year, but know that you're in my heart this year, and I embrace you. Thank you, Susan. Mark Thompson, you go ahead and unmute. Yeah, Mark Thompson, yeah.
Okay. I'm really struck by Abraham's servant. And I was wondering, first of all, I don't recall that Abraham's servant has a name. Does he have a name? I didn't see that in the text. I only see, I am Abraham's servant, he began.
It's not in the text.
It's not in the text. And I'm thinking, you know, he has such a beautiful passage here. It's almost like a soap opera. And at the very end, on verse 69 or 49, he says, and now if you mean to treat my master with true kindness, tell me, and if not, tell me also that I may turn right or left. And this is such a human thing. I mean, we were talking about needing to find answers. And here's this poor guy just wanting to get an answer for Abraham. And a simple man, one who apparently doesn't even deserve to have a name in this story. He's important. I mean, gee, there's a lot of text devoted to him. So it just occurs to me that this simple person is seeking answers. And I'm looking also at your painting, and I'm thinking the artist who created that painting is moving on to the next process of creation, maybe seeking an answer that he didn't receive when he first created that painting. And it just strikes me that it's the human condition, that we really are always seeking answers. Behind me is a portrait of Galileo, one of my heroes. And he was always about seeking answers, to the point where he was gravely punished for making the wrong answers.
Yeah.
So I don't know, it just seems to be the human condition, and it's revealed in Abraham's servant, it's revealed in the painting, it's revealed in my own desperate need for answers at this time. And it's really quite remarkable. So thank you.
Beautiful, Mark. And here's what you got me thinking about as well, the fact that at least in this portion, it doesn't have a name. This notion about that we have in Jewish traditions of the Lamed Vavneks, the 36 righteous people that maintain the existence of the world through the righteousness, but we never know who they are.
Oh.
So maybe this character was one of those then, someone that we don't know. We don't know who the really truly righteous ones are. They are anonymous. They're unknown to us. That they're not the ones that are going to have these prominent celebrity roles in social media. That there's someone just down the block from where you live who lives such a generous, gracious life and helping others. It's beautiful. So maybe that's who this character represents. Thank you so much. So let me call on Margot, and then I've got Barbara, and then Dave and Steve. Go ahead, Margot.
Okay, I feel like I'm mundane after all these erudite statements, but Rabbi, I do know two people who are in the righteous few, and they are two women, which is why I can believe that Eliezer was happy for somebody else's good fortune, because these two women and others that I've known, but these two women that I'm thinking of would be very happy for somebody else's good fortune.
Mm.
One of them was a woman I knew in Downey, and the other, Rabbi, and some of you know, is Jean Blakey. These two women gave and gave and gave, and it wasn't just giving, it was their thinking. I know Jean would wake up in the morning, I swear she told me this, and thought, what good thing can I do today? And my other friend from Downey all had similar thoughts. When somebody was unkind to her, she said to me, what could I have done that made this person react that way toward me? And so when and these two women died young, too young, and you would think would bring, and it's sad, because had they lived, they would have done even more good. But you think, well, this is an ending now to those good deeds, but it's not, because it's a beginning in their children and grandchildren. I don't know Jean's children. I know this other lady, her name was Leela, her children and her grandchildren, and her showing them the way to live brought about a beginning in their lives of emulating her, and full of charity and good deeds. So we have an ending and a beginning, but it's kind of a continuation.
And Margot, you have taught us something that is so embedded in our Jewish tradition, which is this: you use the word mundane. You said, I hate to be at the mundane level. That's what you said. our tradition teaches us that it is from the mundane that we get to the profound. The mundane is the source of what is profound in life. So thank you very much for reminding us of that teaching. Thank you. And Barbara, did you have some comments?
I've been thinking the Parsha opens with the death of Sarah, but I think actually the whole section, and I'll say the section is different than many other Parshas, and in that it focuses entirely on Isaac. Often there's a little piece of something else within a Parsha, and you wonder, why is that in there? This is a story. This follows the whole storyline from beginning to end. And I think it makes Sarah's archetype more complicated. She's more than the negation. Her line, she doesn't die. She may die in the first sentence, but she doesn't die. She goes on as Isaac. Now, the writers of the Torah didn't know about chromosomes. They knew about line, but they didn't know about chromosomes. Her line lives. I had a DNA test and found that I was 98.7% Ashkenazi. There's almost nothing in me that is not Ashkenazi. So, her line is with me still. Isaac is with me. She is with me.
So let me just read a verse that kind of amplifies what you're saying. This is from chapter 24, verse 67. Isaac then brought her, Rebekah, into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he took Rebekah as his wife. Isaac loved her and thus found comfort after his mother's death.
Right.
He takes her into his mother's tent. And there's it's as if his mother's tent is this place of sanctification. So it's beautiful, and the tent becomes the source of this new unity that becomes Rebekah and Isaac. So quite beautiful what you're saying. I know Richard has some comments, and Dave, did you have some comments as well? Then we'll get to Richard.
Yeah, what I found was interesting, I've heard of this before, but when Abraham was buried, both his sons, Isaac and Ishmael, who he threw out of the camp with his mother, they thought he was sending them out to their deaths. And they both came to bury him.
Together, right.
Then I had an alternate thought just now, just a few minutes ago. Isaac probably came to pay his respects to Abraham. How about Ishmael? Did he come to spit on his grave? I don't know.
Okay, thank you.
Did he still hate Abraham? Is that possible? That's another.
Wow. Thank you. Richard?
Yes. Sarah is very much our mother. And I want to take issue with the notion that she's just being constricting, and she is giving form. Abraham is very expansive. He has children by 3 different wives, and there are bunches of them. And we know, and maybe Sarah knew or didn't know, but God knew that it's going to be that line. And she knows that's the line. It's her son. And it's her tent and her mind that needs to nourish us. And so she was doing the right thing. The other thing I wanted to say was about, again, Eleazar, whether that's the servant we hear about beforehand that would have inherited everything if Abraham would have died without his son. But he has no name in this passage. You referred to him as Eleazar. But the thing I noticed about him was that when he saw the girl, when he saw Rebekah, and she came and watered his camels. And he prayed, but the first prayer was to God, not for having made his task successful, but for having served his master. And here is something that we're being told, kind of like, get rid of your ego. It's not about the stuff you might inherit. There's a mission here that's going on, that God has come to Abraham to give him a line, and they're going to be Hebrews and go across borders and go beyond the pale. And he understands that and integrates it. And the last thing I want to say about the twilight, isn't that the opening of the Mishnah about when can you say Shema? Something about the time and the new beginning. All week long, I've been looking up the word Bereshit. You said it's not a verb. And what are those? What are the literal translation of the first two words of Genesis? It seems to me that every morning we take a new form into the world, because in the morning we say, we thank God for returning our soul unto us. Well, what did he do with it when it was with him overnight? Was he oiling it? Was he brushing down the screen that took the format of who we are and getting a little better so we could do a little bit better job tomorrow if we prayed and cleaned up some of our act? And that, yes, I want to be different tomorrow morning. I want to be better at what I do. And I look at this picture, and when you look at it, he's embracing a globe from one to the other. That's why I want to hear again what it was you said about Bereshit. Supposed to be a verb that follows it, and it's not a verb, but it's like in a beginning, or you have to start with something. You have to have a form, and then the next word is it's seen something suddenly. That there's sight, or there's an appearance that falls. There's the sea and the sea above and the sea below. But can you say once more what that Bereshit is as a form of a word? What kind of word is it?
It's what we would call the construct form, which means that what follows the word Bereshit should be a noun, but instead it's followed by a verb.
And that verb is?
Bara, which means create.
So, and it's a construct, and it's not followed by a verb. So, but what would be it's in something, there's a preposition there, and then the word beginning.
Richard, this is the whole point, you see, is that the Torah is trying to demonstrate to us that creation is not something that is given to us. It is something that we participate in. And
yes,
it does that by saying, the word Bereshit, do you understand what that means? And our response is, well, I thought I knew what it meant, but it should be followed by a noun if it means anything, but it's not followed by a noun, it's followed by a verb. So now I have to figure this out. And that's when God would say to us, yeah, that's the point. You need to help. I have given you with this opening word, the model for what creation is about, which is you got to do something. This creation stuff isn't going to work unless you are provoked into participating in this act of creation. You can't just read the story passively. You got to work at creating the meaning. So that's what's happening there.
It doesn't say Adonai created. It just says created.
Oh, okay. So this is a story for maybe next year, because yes, what the Kabbalists would say is, if you read it in the order in which the words appear, then the word for God is no longer to be understood as the subject of the verb create.
Yes.
God becomes an object of the verb create. God.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Very good. Let me get to Jay. Okay.
Yes.
Jay, did you have some comments?
Well, going along with the Sufi imagery and the dance and the painter who says, when I put my signature on it, then I move on to the next. My interpretation has been the vowel the before Bereshit. When God began to create the heaven and the earth, this was the beginning of his painting. There were other paintings possibly before, but he began this creation. This is the thing I'm going to sign off on. He hasn't signed off on it yet, but we're in the process of this creation. And that's the way I see it. So when God began to create the heaven and earth as we know it, it's not like in the beginning, because it wasn't the beginning. God has no beginning, God has no end.
Mhm.
That's my interpretation of it. And again, who knows?
Who knows? Thank you. I love it. And Steve,
Okay. I got 2 points I want to cover. Just my idea of the picture in the context of the study sheet. I see Abraham, I see a globe, I see clouds, I see a world being populated. That all aside, doing just a little research while I'm sitting here watching this. First off, this is not a he that painted this, it's a she. She's a 45-year-old Iranian who has a degree in physics and currently lives in Turkey.
And she's gorgeous.
Pardon me?
She's
There's
gorgeous.
Turkey.
And so, and then looking at some other pictures, yes, this is a dervish, and she has painted some pictures with dervishes in wine glasses, to where spirituality is being swirled and aerated in the wine glasses by these. So anyway, I just wanted to, oh, and that her name translates to traveling girl.
so much for finitude. Thank you very much.
Yes, and of course, wine is not allowed to Muslims, which she is.
Okay. So much for finitudes, right? I want to thank everyone for so much that you contribute to my understanding and my growth and my well-being. I'm so grateful that we come together like this. We immerse ourselves in these words of Torah, and then lo and behold, we find that a lot of words of Torah are within us as well. And we mix them together, we swirl them around, we paint the pictures with them, and hopefully you feel as enriched as I do. I'm very grateful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Everyone has a good week. Be well to yourselves, be well to one another, and I look forward to our regathering. Be well. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you,
Shabbat
Rabbi.
shalom.
God bless you all.